I'll turn this over to you, and give me the cue, and I'll don the white gloves and get up.
I think you should do it now.
Right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Why not?
I'd be glad to do it.
If you haven't seen this, it's just the greatest thing in the world, and we owe that good fortune to Lynn Wheelwright, who is, you all know Lynn Wheelwright sitting there. Lynn brought the guitar up from Utah, and it's been here for a couple of months. This isn't the first time it's been here, if I'm correct. But Lynn has been fortunate. Lynn got that guitar. He has his own long story about that, which is an incredible, amazing story. But that is Charlie Christian's guitar. It's been photographed several times. It's been authenticated many, many times over. And Lynn is the world's, authenticator, so to speak, on this subject. So it's the real deal. It is the real deal. That's it. And we played it last night. We came here after we played with Marty Stewart's band. We came here and had basically it was a 2-hour jam session with all of Marty Stewart's band members. We sat right here on the stage, and I played that guitar and passed it to the other one, and I took the bass, and then they played it, and then another one came up, and we swapped out. And that guitar is just, it's like Charlie's vibrations are still inside that guitar. It was really amazing. We had one hell of a time here last night. It was. I wish you all had been here. Some of you were here. It was ridiculous. It really was. But that is the guitar. So if you get a chance, you might come up and just touch it, just to say you did. So I don't have any photos or pictures or anything like that. But there is something I do have. I should have brought this up. My presentation really is kind of two different parts. One of the things I want to talk about, I mean, you can read the history of Charlie Christian, and you've seen different articles and books and that kind of thing, but not too many books. I want to talk to you about how this book happened, how this came to be. And it's really kind of an incredible story. I am proud to say that this is the definitive book on Charlie Christian in the entire world. It's the only book ever really written in biography on Charlie Christian in America. And I was the first one to do it, and I'm really proud of it. This book, you're not going to find anything on the planet that's more thorough than this book. And I'm just telling you the truth. This is the book of all books, because there was no stone unturned. You won't find anything that's more detailed than this, and it goes above and beyond Charlie Christian, but the whole history of pretty much jazz guitar, the history of swing bands, the history of Oklahoma music, the history of territory bands, all the history of Western swing. There's a ton of stuff in this book, and it's all tied together, which is the greatest thing. When you dig deep enough, you find out that everything relates to everything, and that's the truth. And I think we're seeing that here, because even from the last lecture we just heard, he started talking about sort of how the Hawaiian guitar started sliding toward jazz. And we know that's true because one of the first influences of jazz guitar, which sort of preceded Charlie Christian, was Eddie Durham. And Eddie Durham, his whole thing was, he was sort of the king of that kind of style of playing. That was his reputation. So there's very, very close ties. Anyway, I wrote this book, but I had a lot of help with this book in terms of the inside track and inside information on Charlie Christian's life and his family. And Craig McKinney sitting over there, who was a lawyer in Topeka. What I want to talk about is how this whole thing happened, because Craig McKinney had everything to do with exactly what transpired to make this thing happen. So let me get into that a little bit. I kind of told the story in these two articles I wrote. I was writing CD reviews and extended articles about jazz, these two magazines, Jazz Improv, which is now called Jazz Inside magazine. So the first one I wrote, this is Pat Medina on cover, who's also a really good friend of mine, who I sort of am an authority on. But we're not here to talk about that today. This is the first part of a two-part article I wrote on Charlie Christian. And it was called In Search of Charlie Christian, because that's basically what this whole thing was about. I just went on this journey to try to find out what he was, where he was, how he was, why he was. And so this is the first part of the article, that's the cover. And then the second part came in the next issue, and this is Dizzy Gillespie on the cover, but this was the second part. So these two issues, volume 4, number 4 in Jazz Improv magazine in 2004, or summer of 2004, is part 1. And part 2 was volume 5, number 1 in the autumn of 2004. So if you want to get the original articles, and the reason why I say that is because there are pictures in those articles that I don't have. I didn't bring a slideshow, but there are pictures in the article, both articles, of me with Charlie Christian's family. Charlie Christian, basically his wife, and his only daughter. And I did a jazz festival with them that summer, and actually Russell Malone, who is a legendary jazz guitar player, if you don't know, there's a picture with him and some other famous Oklahoma City people that we were all there together. So there's some really great pictures that I really would love for you to see. And I actually did bring these so that when I finish, you can pull them out and take a look at them, take a look at the pictures in here. So anyway, let me sit these over here and then try to talk about kind of how this whole thing started. So this lecture is called Searching for Charlie Christian. So if you know Oklahoma City very well, and you know the history of the jazz guitar and Charlie's sort of historic rise there when he was discovered by John Hammond, you know, the area that you want to go to is called the Deep Deuce. That was the nickname for 2nd Street. It's called the Deep Deuce, right? So that's kind of where all of that happened. It's now known as Bricktown, I believe. They remodeled a lot of that area, and it's called Bricktown now. But that area is also the home of where the legendary novelist Ralph Ellison grew up. And Ralph Ellison grew up at the same time as Charlie Christian, but I think he was a bit older. But if you read some of the things that Ralph Ellison has written, it would almost sound like he and Charlie Christian were like best buddies at the same time. But actually, Ralph Ellison spent time growing up with Charlie's older brother. I think he's more Edwards, between Clarence and Edwards' age, to be honest with you. The Deep Deuce area gave, I guess, birth to a lot of other musicians who came before Charlie Christian. People like Jay McShann and Count Basie and Lester Young, who are all kind of traveling through basically what's called the era of territory bands. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. To tie all this together in terms of then and now, there is a woman who I should mention. I have to mention her. Her name is Anita Arnold. And she basically is doing currently the International Jazz Festival, Charlie Christian International Jazz Festival. And there's going to be one coming up in the first week of June, and I'm headlining that show. And I'm mentioning this to say that I'm going to be playing that guitar, thanks to Lynn Wheelwright again. That's why I call him Big Brother. I'll be playing that guitar on that Saturday night, headlining the Charlie Christian Festival in Oklahoma City. So I hope you guys can be there for that. So Anita wrote a couple of books. She sort of was the authority on Charlie Christian in Oklahoma City. She wrote like 2 or 3 books. I brought one of them with me. She wrote Charlie and Deuce, Charlie Christian Photo Collection, which I brought. And then she wrote another book called Legendary Times and Tales on 2nd Street. So that's sort of the history of where Charlie kind of got his start. So most people might not know that Charlie Christian was not born in Oklahoma City. I actually thought he was, but he was born in Bonham, Texas. And I had no idea. And if you look for his burial site, it's not in Oklahoma City, but his headstone is in Ballroom, Texas, which is where Anita was when she met this other gentleman who was really important to the story. His name is Leo Valdez. Is Leo still alive? You know, this is a strange story. What I'm about to tell you takes a lot of sort of twists and turns, and there's a lot of names that you may know and some of you might not. But Leo Valdez is a very important name to know about. And we actually don't know if he's still alive. I haven't heard from him in years. But Leo was a person, according to Leo, what Leo told me, he heard a recording of him in Austin, Texas back in 1958. And he was hooked on him from that point on and said he wanted to find everything he could about him. At the time that I met Leo, Leo seemed to have had every recording and every transcription and everything on Charlie. Like there was just this treasure trove of material that I didn't know existed. He started transposing or transcribing a lot of Charlie Christian solos note for note and trying to figure out how Charlie Christian used the technique with his left hand and his right hand to play the things he played. Now, I will tell you, Leo was a great researcher, but one of the first arguments I had with him was about the technique that Charlie Christian used as a guitar player. And without getting too deep into it, I will tell you that that's one thing I do know about. And Leo was just wrong about what he thought about what Charlie Christian played. Leo did a lot of research, but when it comes to playing the actual guitar, they were unmistakable. And also, if you really listen to the sound, there's certain licks that Charlie plays that would never sound that way if he played with this technique that Leo thought he played with, which is with 4 fingers. Charlie Christian was not a 4-finger player. He was a 3-finger player. And if you really listen, and you can even see in the history, a lot of the greatest jazz musicians play with what I call a flat finger technique, and they play with 3 fingers. They don't play with 4. Some jazz guitar players do. It's more of a classical technique, but the real old school black jazz musicians, you can look at George Benson, Wes Montgomery, Grant Green. There's a history of this playing with 3 fingers. And there's a certain sound that you get, and a certain type of effect that you get by playing that way. And Charlie was one of those people. So, and I knew that, because I'm one of those people. I mean, I can do both. But when I first started playing, if you look at a lot of the real blues guitar players, they all play with 3 fingers, and they play with this sort of flat finger technique. And it's because it's a model of efficiency. There's a method to the madness. And so I knew that. So some of the transcriptions that Leo had were just wrong. He was using his 4th finger like Charlie never played with his 4th finger. You know, maybe for some chords, but never single note stuff. Anyway, so Anita Arnold in Oklahoma City met Leo Valdez in April of 1994 while they were standing at the gravesite in Ballroom, Texas, for Charlie Christian. So Anita asked, when she found out how knowledgeable Leo was, asked if she could, you know, sort of get some of this material because she was collecting stuff, and they met there, and so they agreed to get together, and you know, they worked together. So she was trying to get this material to do the presentation for the 11th annual Charlie Christian Festival at the time. So I had just finished writing a book on, I think it was the Pat Metheny book I wrote, the biography of Pat Metheny, and I was looking for something next to do. And I stumbled across this, and I thought, well, Charlie Christian is great. I know his music. I wanted to find out if someone else had written the book. So I started digging around, surfing the internet, and that's when I kind of found about Leo's website. Now, I don't know if it's still up. Craig, you can tell me if it is or not. He had a website called Solo Flight, the Charlie Christian website. I don't know if it's still there or not.
It's not.
It's not? That's really too bad, because it was great stuff. Okay, so on his site, he boasted, and it was true, detailed solography, complete discography, solo and riff transcriptions, including tablature, a photo gallery, bibliography, CD reviews, newsletters, links to other sites, and more. I mean, and it really was that. It was an incredible website. So it was like hitting the jackpot for me. And I thought, this is amazing. I got to meet this guy. And so I contacted him and I asked him if he would be willing to help me or work with me about how to approach my new project of, I'm going to write the definitive Charlie Christian book. And so the first thing he told me was he'd been burned by a lot of other people who had been kind of saying they wanted to do the same thing, and you know, people had borrowed his material and didn't give him credit for it and stolen his stuff and blah blah blah. And I understood that, so he was sort of had been burned, and I got that. So then I thought, well, I gotta show him that I'm really serious and I'm not gonna, you know, be one of those people. So I said three things to him. One, I sent him a layout of the chapter, the whole outline of the book. The second thing I did, I confessed to him that I had no plans whatsoever of trying to complete this book without his help. So I basically said, you will help me. And then the third thing I said, if you give me, you know, the same sort of latitude that you gave some of these other people who burned you, I guaranteed him I'd never use anything without his permission. My publisher gave me complete control over the content of the material, and that anything he gave me would be presented completely intact when everything was said and done. So basically I was just giving him my word that I would do what I said I would do. And then I think I sent him a copy of one of my earlier books called The Jazz Band Director's Handbook to show him that I really could write. Because I think a lot of these other people were saying they were researchers, but they weren't necessarily writers. That's the thing. It's like, to be a really good writer, you have to write, but it's not enough to just know the material. You got to know how to put it down. And so that I had a lot of experience at. And that was the other thing. Leo wasn't a writer. I mean, Craig's not a writer. Craig's a lawyer, but he had the connection. So that's why my whole promise was, I'll do the writing. I'll take care of it. But I just want people to help me put this thing together, because if there's someone else who's an authority, you want to rely on their experience and knowledge. And Craig McKinney is certainly one of those people, because as you'll find out, he had direct connections with Charlie Christian. So anyway, I talked him into it. He agreed to do it. And then he said he would send me copies of the stuff that he and Anita had worked together on from Oklahoma City. And Leo said, you should contact Anita Arnold. So I contacted Anita, and he also mentioned that some of Charlie's relatives were still living and still alive in Oklahoma City. And then he said he would be the one to introduce me to these family members related to Charlie Christian. So I was getting pretty excited. Now, I still hadn't met Craig yet, so it'll all come around. So look, I went to Oklahoma City, and I was introduced to a man named George Wesley, who was a fraternity brother of mine, it turns out. And he told me about Billie Jean Johnson, who was the daughter of Charlie Christian, only kid Charlie Christian had, Billie Jean Johnson. And her mother is Margaretta Lorraine Downey, and her last name was Christian. And I was invited to come and visit with them for interviews, which was really incredible that they were actually there. But they just like Leo, were extremely reluctant to talk to me. They were really, it took 3 times for me to even get them to sort of open up. And when I first met them, they kind of just sat there with their arms crossed, like almost scowling. And, you know, I could only assume that they had been through some kind of rough times with people sort of using them or misrepresenting themselves to them and that kind of thing. So they had their guards up big time. So after everything kind of went well, you know, with me kind of meeting them for the first time, I asked if Leo would be willing to come down to Oklahoma City with me to see if we could do some deeper digging. Now, if you knew Leo at all, Leo was one of those people that, like I said, I kind of got into arguments with him about this technique. Leo was one of those people that he knows what he knows, you know, and that's fine, except for when it's not. So Leo told me point blank, boy, there's nothing, you're not going to learn anything down there. I did it all, I got it all. You're not going to learn anything. And he actually said that to me, and I kind of took that as a challenge because I just know that that's not really what good researchers do. That a really heavy researcher would never say that. There's always more, and I knew there was. So anyway, I thought you still should come. So I had to bribe him. I offered him a plane ticket. So I got him to get on offered him a plane ticket, and he said I hate to fly. He didn't want to fly. And this is in October of 2003, so I hate to fly. So he eventually conceded to the flight arrangement, and he wanted to know if he could be the co-author of the book. So now he's moving in. Now he's wanting to buy in. He's wanting to really get in. So I don't know if I said yes or not. I think I may have said we'll talk about it in Oklahoma City. So anyway, me and my wife Deborah prepared to get to Oklahoma City. It was about a 5-hour drive from where we are. We got there on Friday, October 10th, and we met Anita Arnold and talked with her. And that was the first day we realized that the Southern hospitality in Oklahoma City is really real. I mean, they really know how to treat people, and it was really great. So here we are, it's me and Leo and Anita Arnold and my wife Deborah. We're sitting in a restaurant called Mantel's. It was her favorite Italian restaurant to eat at. She introduced me to somebody named Ron Tarver, who was a staff photographer for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And he was working on some kind of project about Oklahoma City's Deep Deuce area. And so we met him. And then Anita took us over to George Wesley's house. Now, George Wesley is an Emmy Award-winning film producer. And that was really cool. So I met George Wesley and his wife. And he had done some projects about Deep Deuce and the music history in Oklahoma City. He won an Emmy Award for this film called Through a Looking Glass Darkly. And it was a documentary film on black life in Oklahoma City. He used to work for NBC, and his reputation in Oklahoma City was known as the voice of the black community. So I'm making all these connections now, one person leading to the next, leading to the next. You can see this thing is starting to gather momentum. George Wesley is one of the people who knew some people who played with Charlie Christian, and one of the people he told me about was a man named Leslie Sheffield, who was the band leader that Charlie Christian was playing with when Charlie Christian got discovered. So the Leslie Sheffield band, before Leslie Sheffield died, he gave a documentary film performance to George Wesley about a video show called All That Jazz. And you can see on this film, Wesley Sheffield is up in age and he's playing piano and talking extensively about being Charlie Christian's band leader. So Wesley Sheffield told George that he was the one who set up the audition for Charlie Christian to meet John Hammond. And this major event took place at Ruby's Grill in Oklahoma City, down on the Deep Deuce area. The Deep Deuce area is really about 3 or 4 blocks. It's not that long, but it's like where everything happened. So Leslie Sheffield told George that this Charlie Christian thing that happened with John Hammond, it really was supposed to be an audition for the entire group. But when John Hammond heard Charlie Christian, everything else was like, well, I'm only interested in that guy. So I think Leslie Sheffield still expressed a little bit of disappointment because he thought the whole band was going to be famous. But instead it turned out that it was just about Charlie. There's another name that I met. This guy was, I think, 85 at the time. His name is Isaac Kimbrough. And Isaac Kimbrough talked about the Deep Deuce area. There was a particular spot where the hill goes up and it's called, they call it Silk Stocking Hill, because all the black doctors, lawyers, and teachers all kind of lived in this particular area. And Isaac Kimbrough went to Douglas High School, which is like the famous, sort of black elementary school and high school. And he went to school with Charlie Christian. So that's kind of how Kimbrough gets tied into it. And Ralph Ellison went to that school, so you can start seeing that it's all these sort of concentrated areas of Oklahoma City. All of these names are kind of tied in together. So Ralph Ellison's last year of school was the same year that Isaac Kimbrough was there. So he started describing Ralph Ellison and the kind of car he drove and some of these other people. And he said about Charlie Christian, well, we weren't that buddy-buddy, but I knew him and he knew me. And he also said Charlie's brother, I'm assuming he's talking about Clarence at this point, or maybe, no, it would be Edward he was talking about. He said he was supposed to be a piano player, but he wasn't much of one. We all grew up here and we went to the same school, we studied with the same music teacher. And this is where the name Zelia Bro comes in. It's an interesting name. Her last name is spelled B-R-E-A-U-X, Zelia Bro. She was pretty much the most important music teacher in all of Oklahoma City for black people. And so she's the one that taught Charlie. She taught Ralph Ellison. She taught Charlie's brothers. So that's where that name comes in. She had girls and boys choirs. She was everything.
Was she a guitar teacher? Was she a guitar teacher?
No. I mean, I'm glad you said that, because what she taught Charlie Christian, this is fascinating. Most people don't know this, but Charlie Christian started out. The guitar came as a result of him being in a musical family. His father was a musician, his brothers were, his father's brothers were. I mean, it's like this huge musical family. They played violin, string instruments. They all sang. They were incredible singers. They'd go up and down the street, strolling up and down and sort of serenading people, and that's how they made money.
I don't think she taught Charlie Christian.
Well, but she kind of did, because
She tried to interest him in it,
it was trumpet, and he was not good at it at all.
though. He hated it for the
What?
horn on the lip.
Yeah, she got Charlie Christian to play the trumpet, and Charlie Christian hated it because he did not like the callus that you have to build up, and when you build up your chops, you have this corn down in the lip that you get. And Charlie hated his trumpet. And so that did not last long. So no, Charlie, I mean, she didn't teach him to play guitar, but the music program that she was responsible for, she did appoint him on that instrument, and it did not last long. But most people don't know that. The other thing most people don't know is Charlie Christian also tried and had a little bit more success at, but not as much as guitar, obviously. But Charlie Christian fell in love with saxophone.
Oh.
And this is also around that same time. He didn't
play the saxophone.
I said he fell in love with the saxophone.
He didn't play it.
He fell in love with the saxophone. Did I say that? Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up is, if you really listen to what he's playing, all of Charlie Christian's licks, if you really listen to it, they're all saxophone driven. Charlie Christian worshipped Lester Young. And if you listen to those lines that he's playing, that's one of the reasons why that sound is so sort of modern and advanced. He is doing his best to play like Lester Young. That was his guy. And the other thing is, I might be getting some things out of order here, but I'm just bringing them up as we kind of talk about them. Charlie Christian, even though he wound up with Benny Goodman through John Hammond, that is not where he started out wanting to be. Charlie Christian was a Duke Ellington man. He wanted to be with Duke Ellington. And, Duke Ellington didn't have, Duke Ellington's history doesn't have a, Fred Guy was a guitar player that started out with banjo, and there's no real strong evolution of guitar players in Duke Ellington's band, but this is who Charlie wanted to be with. And he said, if I can't be with them, I want to be with the Count Basie band. And that almost happened, except for when the auditions came, Freddie Green got the gig. But Charlie had been running across all of these guys because there's sort of this cross-section of great legends, this whole concept of territory bands. All of the bands in Tennessee, Oklahoma, Kansas, they're all kind of crossing the lines all together. They're all running into each other. They're all hanging out. And at the end of these, they have these cutting contests. And they'd have these jam sessions, and one band tries to outplay the other one. And at the end of that, they all get together and kind of hang out. And they have, they eat and they drink corn liquor and that kind of thing. So they all knew each other. So the Lester Youngs of the world, and a lot of the Duke Ellington, a lot of the Count Basie guys, the Duke Ellington band, the Count Basie band, they're all running into each other. So Charlie that was a huge influence on him. That's what he wanted to do. That's what he wanted to be. He would have loved to have been in Duke Ellington band, but it didn't happen. And in the Count Basie band, he wanted, but that didn't happen either. That we went and found out some documents had been sort of forged and faked, and that's another topic. But yeah. So I'm mentioning that to say that when Leo Valdez started telling me that there weren't things that we were going to find there, he was just wrong about it. Roger mentioned this guy named Benny Garcia, who's a guitar player. Craig might want to have some things to say about this too, but Benny Garcia supposedly had one of Charlie, and you might have some things to say about this too. Benny Garcia, when I was in Oklahoma City, I kept hearing that he had a guitar, one of Charlie Christian's guitar hidden under his bed. And I heard that a lot. And so I was trying to reach this Benny Garcia guy, and I wanted to talk to him, and I guess it was his wife that kept answering the phone many, many times, and she would not let me get past her. She would never put him on the phone, but I heard from numerous people that there was this guitar that somehow fell into the hands of Benny Garcia that everybody had been looking for. It was like the holy grail of guitars. And I'm still not sure that that's not true. Lynn, you might have something to say about that, but from what I understood, Benny Garcia that was his guitar that was hidden under Charlie's bed. And there was a point, and I do know this is true, where one of Charlie's guitars in Oklahoma City came up missing and nobody could figure out where it was. Now, I can't remember how it was that he supposedly got it, but I had enough that I believed, and I actually thought that might have been true, and I went to try to look for it, and they would never, his wife would never, she'd come up with a different excuse every time when I got on the phone. I heard, so I'm trying to get hold of this guy and see his guitar, but it wasn't happening. I met Charlie Christian's daughter and her mother, like I mentioned earlier. Anita Arnold had this building called the Black Liberated Arts Center, and so we made this arrangement, and they both showed up at that place, and we talked. And eventually they opened up to me, and they were being very, very nice, and they wound up sharing quite a few things with me, and that turned out to be really good. So then I went home and I wrote up the first half of this article, and that was the first one. So going back to Leo, in the following year of January, he told me about a guy named Gary Hansen who had another website and had quite a bit of material. And this is where Craig McKinney comes in. There was some material on this website that had Clarence Christian material on it, and I didn't understand how or where he got that. And this is where evidently Craig had submitted some stuff to this guy. So Craig was living in Topeka at the time, and I tried to contact him, and evidently for some reason Leo Valdez was talking about how, when I asked Leo about it, he said, well, nobody can find Craig. Nobody knows where he is. And so somehow I just looked up and I found he's right up the road from me. I'm in Manhattan, he's 45 minutes away in Topeka. So that's another example of Leo talking about how you can't find anything, and then some things was kind of sitting right there. So I contacted Craig, and Craig was kind of reluctant too, to be honest, from what I remember. And the only way I can get Craig to come down to my house is if I bribed him and I told him my wife made the best fried chicken in the world. And so,
Does she?
yes.
Your address is,
Yeah.
544 Oak
Suddenly
Hill
you're
Drive.
no longer interested in the guitars, and let's go on with it. Yep.
So he came down but he was reluctant too. Like everybody is so with this Charlie Christian thing. It's really amazing. The people who have connection to it, it's like everybody's like really guarded because I guess it's just kind of sacred ground that you're treading on, and you know. So anyway, Craig came down and we had a really good time. We had a good conversation on the phone. He came down in person. I persuaded him, and I basically gave him the same offer I gave Leo, which is if you trust me with your material, I won't violate any of I won't break the oath. You know, we can do this together, and I will give you full credit for everything that you give me. You can trust me. And so now Craig's story of how he got involved in Charlie Christian is that it's kind of the same thing with Leo. In 1975, Craig was a student at Washburn University, and he said
You want me to tell it?
well, you might as well. Go ahead.
Well, I was hanging out down at the river, like Chris Farley. I was in high school, and we were talking about Jimi Hendrix, loved Jimi Hendrix. My friend said, my brother, he's a DJ, he said, there was a Jimi Hendrix for Jimi Hendrix. And I said, really? He said, yeah, his name was Charlie Christian. I said, whoa. So I went to the local record store and saw a Flight had come out, and I'm not a musician. And I went and bought Soul Flight and Side 4. And about the fourth or fifth time I heard that, fortunately it's vinyl, but I heard that, it hit me like a ton of bricks. So this goes back to my teenage hard drive. I just loved it. And then for years, I would read everything I could about Charlie Christian. And it would always say he was the greatest ever, but we don't know anything about it. Maybe he's an idiot savant, we just don't know. So then I was a history major at Washburn University, and for our senior paper we had to do a history project. And I had turned a friend of mine on to Charlie Christian, Kevin Seminal, he was a guitar player, and turned him around. And so once I decided I'll do this paper on Charlie Christian, even though I'm not a musician, I'm not qualified. So I got a Saturday Review article from 1958 by Ralph Ellison. And it said, Charlie had two brothers, Clarence and Edward. I didn't realize Edward died in 1948. So I called Clarence's, we got out the phone book, and Oklahoma City phone book from the library of Topeka. Called up, he answered the phone. His wife told me years later that they had not talked to any, but his mother wouldn't talk to anybody, he wouldn't talk to anybody. But I was young and I was 20, and I just said, was Charles Christian your brother? He said, that was my brother. And so he invited me down. I took a ball and sack with Kevin. So we had 4.5 hours of interview in January 1978, and he laid out the whole story. And then he was 5 years older than Charles, lacking a day, as he put it. Charles was born July 29th. He was born July 30th. And Edward was 5 years older than him. So he saw everything from day one through his death. And so then a year later, I had finished my draft of the paper, and I called Clarence, and his wife said, well, we buried him yesterday. And so it all just was alive when he was alive, then it turned to dust. And so then I kept interviewing different people. Leslie Sheffield, who Wayne was talking about there, he said he wrote Going Home. Henry Butler, who's at the train station, Herb Ellis on his Impact, Basie, which didn't talk much. Hammond was just mad that I got through to him. But I then got letters from Goodman's Bach and all these different people in Oklahoma City and Kansas City and Blue Devils. So anyway, I kept writing that. I wrote that paper, turned it in, and then there was a rough draft when Clarence died that I left with the family when I went down after he died. Well, my rough draft, called Charles Christian Musician, was taken by the guy and different people around, floated around the guy in England we were talking about earlier, and they were all using this paper. And so that's when I gave the paper to the guy with the website, Gary Hansen, and I kept rewriting this for 25 years. And people, I would tell everybody all about Charlie Christian, they'd look at me and go, you know, and you practice law, wills in the States and Topeka, you know, and this guy's so great, I've never heard about him, you know, you hear a lot of that, but people that know know. So then what happened, when at the same time I put it, I thought, well, I might as well get, you know, at least have credit for that paper, and so then Wayne calls me, and it's right. And when he called, I just thought, well, he said, I'm writing a book on Charlie Christian. I was like, knock yourself out. But and then that's when the fried chicken came in. And we had a very nice meeting, and our accord was, I said, I spent the last 25 years writing this, I don't want to write anymore. And he says, I can look it up. And that's how it went down.
So it was all due to the chicken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all
I wish my wife were here to take a bow for that chicken, but she's incredible. Now, the thing about it, when I went to Craig's house, this is what's amazing. Craig was at my house with the chicken story, but then I came to see him. This guy has got boxes of stuff, again, under the bed. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, what is that over there? So he's pulling out boxes and boxes of stuff that like he's just like literally sitting on, under the bed. Like transcription of like Clarence talking and all of this really rare stuff. I mean, I never got a chance to meet Clarence, you know, but he did. So it's sort of just direct connection. And I'm just thinking, these are the kinds of things. It's kind of like guitars in the glass cases that last night we had such a good time taking those guitars out of those cases and actually playing them. You know.
And that photo in there was in Clarence's, when we did the interview, that photo is.
Yeah, that photo that's out there is
that was on
over the fireplace in Clarence's house. Right. Exactly. And those pictures are in this book as well.
Signed by Charles Christian the Great.
Yeah. So anyway, all these names are connected. We got together. We made it happen. All of the material he gave me, I used in this book, and it turns. And as a result of that, this is really the most thorough document on the planet. A little bit, because I could get more into like how the story evolved and all that kind of stuff, but I want to just talk a little bit more about Charlie and some of the things that you may or may not know. The evolution of Charlie Christian is one of the things I wanted to try to figure out, like how did he get that way? Because it's almost like it almost came out of nowhere, the level of performance that he did. But there was a point where Charlie wasn't as good as he wound up being in terms of when he died. He got better over time, but there are certain phases that he went through that people like Clarence saw him firsthand go through. So I'm going to name a couple of the bands that Charlie played with on his way to becoming the Charlie Christian that we know. So in 1934, he played with a group called Leonard Chadwick and the Rhythmaires. This is in February of 1934. It's one of the first professional bands that Charlie played with, obviously locally in and around Oklahoma City. And this is before he got with Leslie Sheffield. And Leslie Sheffield eventually took over that band from Leonard Chadwick in June of that year of 34. Leslie Sheffield kind of took over. Because I think Leonard Chadwick was not a good businessman. So Leslie Sheffield took over that band. So that was the first time that
Leslie Sheffield told me they were all a bunch of crooks. He said all band leaders were crooks back then.
Yeah. So there you go. Charlie Christian.
Not him, not included.
Yeah, well, of course not.
He wasn't included himself.
Charlie Christian played at two places that were very popular in Oklahoma City that are no longer there, obviously. The Rhythm Club was a big place that he played a lot, and the Ritz Ballroom was a place he played. Around this time, there's another name of a band leader, the Andy Kirk Band. Andy Kirk was a major band leader, and one of the people that Andy Kirk had in his band was Mary Lou Williams, this beautiful black piano player who was a great singer and a monster piano player. Now, this is sort of off the path, but it's directly related to it. This is the same woman who, I would say maybe 5 years later, wound up being the person that taught all of the people who were anybody who learned and pretty much created what became bebop. Mary Lou Williams was the one that taught Thelonious Monk, Bud Powell, Dizzy Gillespie, all of those heavyweights in New York City. She was the one that was holding court, and they were sitting around at her feet learning what became bebop. It was her. She's the one that taught those people. And most people don't know that. And it's worth mentioning, because that's a great part of history that goes unchecked and unnoticed. But Mary Lou Williams, she was a heavyweight. So she was playing with Andy Kirk at the time when they came through Oklahoma City. She's the one that met Charlie Christian, heard Charlie Christian play, and went back to New York City. And she's the one that told John Hammond about Charlie Christian. She went back, she said, man, we went to Oklahoma City, there's this guy, you gotta hear this dude. You've got to see this guy. And so John Hammond, who had just gone over to Columbia Records to be became the executive producer. And you know the story about John Hammond and all these famous people he discovered. And it's all true. But John Hammond was one of those people who he said, okay, when I get a chance, I'll check him out. And he did. But it was Mary Lou Williams who put that bug in his ear, saying, you've got to see this guy. He's incredible. Getting back to Charlie, in 1935 and 36, he switched bands and he moved up a notch, and he wound up playing with this guy named Alfonso Trent. The Alfonso Trent band was another band that was traveling around through the territories and gaining momentum, and Charlie got even more exposure and traveling far away, other parts like North Dakota, and traveling all up and down in Iowa and going around and getting outside of that immediate area of Oklahoma. So he's getting some road experience now, and he's getting some playing experience, and he's still, Charlie's demeanor was very quiet, very shy, but he just played a mean guitar. And that guitar that you see that's famous, this one here, he wasn't playing that guitar. And this is where Lynn will come in handy, because I think Lynn and I were still trying to figure out what guitar he actually was playing during that time period. But this one, he wasn't playing the Gibsons yet. I don't know what he had at the time he was playing on. And I'm not even sure if what he was playing was actually an electric guitar. Technically speaking, I don't think it was. It might have been an acoustic guitar that was electrified. Am I right about that, Lynn?
Very well could be, yeah, because he had a tradition of using rubber bands to strap microphones to the front of his guitar.
Yeah. So now we're talking about the history of the evolution of the actual electric guitar. So this is 35 to 36 right now. In 1937, Charlie Christian played at the Roseland Ballroom, in Kansas City, where he ran into Charlie Parker. Charlie Parker was a student at Lincoln High School and studied with Buster Smith. And Buster Smith basically was the Zelia Bro in Oklahoma City. He was the equivalent of Zelia Bro, only he was in Kansas City. And he taught everybody who was anybody in jazz in Kansas City. Now, this is where the Kansas City-Oklahoma City connection ties in, because all of those Kansas City guys, Walter Page, Jimmy Blanton, Count Basie, all of this, that's that Kansas City connection. And Buster Smith was sort of his nickname was the Professor. And he taught all of those guys. Now, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the black and white connection. Because we've been discussing about how all of this overlap is happening. And somebody was asking me just last night about it. And actually, well, one of the guys was joking, saying, in this jam session we did last night, he was saying, oh, I'm so sort of embarrassed to be playing these sort of open sort of country guitar chords on this. And he played that guitar last night. And I said, don't be, because this music that they were playing last night, I said, this is a lot of what Charlie Christian was doing and rubbing shoulders with. And some of these names you might know and some of them you might not, but this is all very much a part of what Charlie Christian is and was. Clarence Cagle is one of Charlie Christian's early friends in Oklahoma. Many of these names are right in Oklahoma City. Clarence Cagle, some of you might know who that is. So that was a good friend of Charlie Christian, who you're taking right now. And we're literally talking black and white. And as you know, in the history, that was something that was frowned upon a lot. And basically, it was, a big time separation. But these musicians were not trying to let that stop them from finding what they needed, because the music was in them. They were going to find a way to play together one way or another. So Clarence Cagle, who was clearly white, is finding Charlie, because the kind of thing, it's like when you hear each other play, you have that common bond. It's like nothing's going to stop you from being with that person. I don't care what color he is. I want to be with that guy. So Clarence Cagle was kind of crossing the tracks, as it were, to come into the Deuce and hang out. And obviously the people are looking at him like, what are you doing over here? But at the same time, Charlie is looking at him like, hey brother, let's hang, let's blow. So that was their common bond. So I'm going to give you some other names of people who did that, who Charlie was very good friends with. There was a family of musicians, of string players, and they'd have these huge jam sessions at this barn on a regular basis. Clarence Cagle was one of those people that turned Charlie Christian onto that. Charlie used to go over there on a regular basis and play with them. All of the Salathiel family knew Charlie, embraced him, allowed him to come in, and he played with them. And Charlie was having a direct contact with that swing music, the country swing, jump swing, western swing, whatever you want to call it. That's what they were throwing down. Charlie was into it. He was completely into that. The other thing about Charlie that you might not know is he was, as you might imagine, the radio was everything. These are the channels that Charlie Christian used to listen to on a regular basis. WACO, KVOO, KFXR. Those are stations that Charlie listened to all the time when he was listening to all of the sort of western swing that was happening at the time. Eldon Shamlin is another name that you might want to know. Eldon Shamlin, who played with Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys. Charlie was a humongous fan. Got to know Eldon Shamlin, got to be friends with them. They were ripping and running up and down the street together. And also, eventually, they wound up crossing paths with each other, because Charlie Christian, eventually, these people I'm telling you about, wound up pulling him in, and even Charlie wound up playing at some of the radio shows or broadcasts because of this. So he was really working in some circles that really led to his musical development. And then there's Les Paul. There is a story about Charlie Christian and Les Paul crossing paths at Cain's Ballroom in Tulsa. And evidently, Les Paul was traveling through town with the group. He was playing with the Pennsylvanians at the time. And evidently, they crossed paths at Cain's Ballroom in Tulsa. And from what I've learned, from what I've heard, there was one hell of a jam session. To be honest, this is kind of funny, because in some ways, that's kind of what happened to me last night. I mean, seriously, if you think about it, I mean, this whole, who would have thought I'd have crossed paths with Marty Stewart and have this major jam session on stage with his band? I mean, I didn't come here expecting that at all, but that happened. And then to play with all of his band members here in that post-jam session. So that it happened. I mean, and that's kind of the same thing.
We have the evidence.
Yes, exactly, right? Right, exactly. We have the evidence. And so that's the kind of thing that Charlie Christian was doing back in the day. And crossing paths with people like Les Paul and having to, now, Cain's Ballroom, I don't know that there had ever been anybody black allowed to go in that place, because that's the kind of environment it was at the time. But when you're hanging out with those, with people who are kind of serving as your protectors, and in a white establishment that says, this guy's all right, he's with me. No, nobody's going to mess with Charlie if he's standing next to Les Paul, and Les Paul says, this guy can blow, let him up there.
I think Les Paul made it up.
Maybe he did, maybe he didn't.
Is there any other source for it besides Les Paul?
That's just what I heard.
Les Paul told several stories about that, and it's only at the very end of his life that he says that he met Christian at Cain's Ballroom. So some people think he waited till everybody who might have contradicted him had passed on, or he elaborated in old age. But that connection with people in the Bob Wills band, there's pretty solid evidence for that.
Well, I wasn't there.
Yeah, and you may have.
But all I'm saying is, it wouldn't be, to me, For Charlie Christian, I will say this. It wouldn't surprise me if it did happen, because this is the kind of pursuance that Charlie Christian had. When you have that kind of passion, as far as from Charlie's standpoint, nothing stops you from going after what you want. And he was making those connections. I just rattled off several other names before that, that Charlie was in an environment where he was hanging with white people, and they were embracing him. So I'm not going to say it didn't happen. Maybe it didn't, but it wouldn't surprise me if it did. I will just say that. It wouldn't surprise me if it did, because Tulsa is a place that Charlie would have been trying to go and hang out and play in. And any place that a jam session existed, Charlie was trying to be there. So I know that for a fact. Because you don't get to play like Charlie without going out and playing. You don't read that in a book. You can't learn to play that way. You got to be out in the streets banging with the best of them. And that is the truth.
Now, Wayne, I'd like to add one thing for the record, is that Charles was not only involved with that, he was, according to Clarence, he was the impetus for the Soleil Fields, going to Soleil Fields Bar, and then coming to Deep Deuce. They'd go back and forth, and he wasn't just in it, he was a ringleader at the forefront of that. So I'm just reiterating what you're already saying, but just to add that to the record.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple other names and some other bands that are important. Raymond Zipper Kaufman is another name that's really important, who was a major player. Some of the Western swing bands that Charlie was interested in and trying to play with and getting to meet. Bob Wills, of course, Milton Brown and the Brownies, Aladdin's Laddies, which was basically a radio version of Bob Wills' band. Some of these names are related to the promoters of the radio shows. And that's why you had the Light Crust Doughboys, which obviously was a flour company. So they called themselves the Light Crust Doughboys. And Milton's Browns, Aladdin's Laddies, which Aladdin was like a lamp company. Zeke Campbell is another name that Charlie got to know. And of course I mentioned Elton Shamble already. So this is the kind of thing that Charlie was banging around with. And so Charlie didn't come from nowhere. His evolution came as a direct result of playing with any and everything moving that was swinging. Charlie, so that was his whole thing. If it's swinging, I'm in it. And so that level of musicianship is a result of saying anything that's good music. And even Duke Ellington said that. There's only two kinds of music, good music and bad music. And that Charlie had that same attitude. I don't know how long I've been talking, but I probably should stop. Yeah.
A comment and then a question. I want to reinforce your discussion on the three fingers. Apparently there's some controversy with that. But I've followed guitar for 50 years, and almost all of the good jazz players, white and black, years ago used three fingers. All the blues guys did, and they used mostly downstrokes. And if you're using mostly downstrokes, you get a lot more power, emphasis, and rhythm if you only use the three fingers. And for those who may live in the Wichita or Kansas area, I think it's fair to say that Jerry Hahn is a national treasure here in Wichita, and he's a three-fingered guy, primarily, except for chords, as you pointed out. My question relates to Charlie's age. How old was he at this time, and how did he get from the trumpet player with a calloused lip to the guitar? Once he got there, he took off, but is there any evidence for someone giving him a guitar, or this family you mentioned that was into the strings, you know, where did he get?
Born into it.
Yeah.
What?
When he was a baby, his father went blind, and to support the family, he was a guitar player. He turned to string music, and they'd go out at night and they'd serenade and do what they called bus. And Charles, Edward thought it was beneath his dignity. Clarence just went along. They all played string music, and like he would say, it's in the book, he'd say, sometimes they'd give us a quarter, sometimes a nickel or a piece of chicken. He said that we weren't begging, we had something to offer. So they would serenade, and they'd go by the pool halls. So Dad had an 11-string symphony harp that he played religious music on late at night. And anyway, he turned to that when he went blind, because he was very athletic until that time. So Charles was just a baby. And in fact, the family, according to his girlfriend or wife, also also said the only time they talk about that, Charles, they have a potty cup for him so he wouldn't urinate, you know, on the yard, and they all would laugh about that. But this is how they survived. The dad brought back, they survived with string music, and mom played, his wife and girlfriend said his mom, she even played it.
Okay. So he was playing guitar by the time he got a hold of the trumpet, because somebody taught him theory too.
Bigfoot Chuck Hamilton was Charlie Christian's first real guitar teacher.
Okay.
His name is Chuck Hamilton. And Chuck Hamilton was a friend of Edward's, which is Charlie's older brother.
Okay.
And that was the first guitar
Okay.
teacher Charlie had. And Charlie eventually, and all this, like I said, is all in the book, but Charlie got good enough to the point where he started asking Edward to let Charlie play in his band.
Okay.
And Edward was very reluctant, but eventually Edward gave in and gave him a chance to play, and his brother was completely floored at how good Charlie had gotten. And at that point, that was the beginning of Charlie kind of sitting in and
But
playing.
Bigfoot Chuck played lead chords so you could pick out the melody, and Charles, right from the beginning, went solo.
Okay.
He didn't play lead chords for
Okay.
Clarence.
Yeah.
He started playing solo, so when he's playing acoustic, he's already leading up way before he gets an electric.
Sure.
He's already leading up to that, and then he gets a loud epiphone.
But that's
Okay.
the solo is that's that saxophone
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
That's him, that he
Yeah.
always had
Well,
that saxophone.
Lester Young's,
thing in
yeah,
his ear.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and another thing about that, the picking thing you mentioned, I didn't mention that, but you're absolutely right. The picking technique in your right hand, and this is another thing that I was talking to Leo about. Leo didn't know what the hell he was talking about. The right hand picking technique, you get in a totally different attack when you strike downstrokes, all downstrokes, and if you really watch the really, really good guitar players, George Benson, even Russell Malone, Wes Montgomery even, who didn't even use a pick, but his thumb was the pick, he used it as a pick, all downstrokes. It's a fatter attack, it's a more even attack, and so you get a more consistent sound for every note, and this is the important part about it. This is the guitar trying its best to sound like a piano. Because if you do this alternate picking, every upstroke kind of get a slightly thinner sound. So in order to keep an even sound, it's like if you played a piano scale and used the same amount of deftness in your fingers, the evenness of sound, and even in saxophone, same thing. The piano and sax are very, very related in that way. That's the guitar trying to sound as much like a piano or a saxophone as you can. And when you hear really good guitar players playing that way, that's why they're doing it. And so you're absolutely right. The downstrokes, if you look at George Benson footage, you'll see him playing with down. And some of them can play with downstrokes so fast that it almost sounds like they're alternate picking. But they're doing downstrokes. Charlie Christian was a downstroke player, pretty much. Almost all of his stuff was downstroke playing. And that's why when you listen to that sound, it's this fat, round sound, this juicy sound that sounds as much like a saxophone player as any guitar player you will ever hear. And so that's a good point to mention that. And it was a three-finger technique for sure.
You know, when you talk about the difference between the three and the four-finger technique, the first thing that pops into my mind is another seminal jazz guitarist, Django Reinhardt, who because of an injury, I believe he just used two fingers. But I wonder, was there any relation between those two, or do you see any point to my bringing that up?
Between Django and Charlie?
Yes.
I think they knew of each other's playing. I think they got along really well. They were very familiar with each other. I think their styles, obviously Django had more of sort of the gypsy influence and the whole history of that approach to playing, which had more of a sort of European flair to it. But I don't know that they ever got together and played, but I know that they both knew of each other and respected each other's music greatly.
I guess I was kind of wondering if you had any thoughts on his technique, only having the two fingers.
I would say that his technique, in terms of his right hand, he did a lot more alternate picking, and also in his left hand he had more of a vertical playing. He played more up and down this way. Charlie Christian also played this way, but he also played horizontal as well. A lot of the riffs that you hear Charlie playing are more vertical, playing across the strings from lower string to top string in the same range of frets than playing this way, up and down that way.
Yeah, and you'd be kind of stuck with doing that if you just had a few fingers.
Well, exactly, right. Yeah, that would really limit your playing. So by definition, Django would have to have more vertical access to execute some of those bits.
Okay, didn't mean to give a tangent, but
No,
it's
it's
just
all
made me
good.
kind of think of the difference.
Yeah, well, a lot of people talk about Django and Charlie almost in the same light, and they had some differences, but obviously the fact that they were both swinging was the main common denominator. Yeah.
Since I've read several of your books, I want to put a non-political, non-paid advertisement in for your book on Jimmy Reed.
Jimmy Rogers?
Jimmy Rogers. Wayne wrote a book on a blues, a Chicago blues musician that is absolutely brilliant. And reading it, you get into the whole thing. And so, and Wayne has a blues history. There are almost no folks in the country now playing jazz guitar at an academic level in a major institution who have that background. And so, and this is leading into my question, Wayne. You didn't mention Charlie having been influenced much by these traditional Delta, Chicago bluesmen. And I know his music is not really based that way, but was he influenced? Did he know them? Do you hear that in his playing?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
Because the whole Chicago blues thing happened as a result of the Industrial Revolution, which is well after Charlie was already gone. So that whole style of Chicago blues, all of the Muddy Waters and all of that electrified blues, and the other thing is, the people who created that music in Chicago as a result of the urban revolution, they were all from Mississippi, which is also not Charlie territory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Charlie is a Midwestern product. I mean, Charlie's music and everything he heard and fell in love with is a direct result of the territory bands of the Southwest. I mean, if you want to talk about Texas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Kansas, you know, that's Charlie.
Okay.
And that whole history of swing bands and the crossing of pure country music and just the early advent of jump swing in terms of jazz. So that intersection is where Charlie
Wayne,
is.
I'd like to answer that question too, if I might.
Yep.
Because we asked Clarence that question, his brother, and he said blues were everywhere. He said we lived strictly in a blue environment. He said that for Charles there wasn't enough action in blues. So it's almost as if we looked down upon us.
Yeah.
But when everybody got together, it was blues. So it's just another alternate way of saying what we're already saying. But that's how I answered that question.
But it confirms his genius that he wasn't satisfied with the three chords and the the wanging of the blues. He wanted much more.
Yeah, action of jazz.
But you know, what you just mentioned, you could almost say that same thing about the evolution of country. I mean, if you really listen to Bob Wills, I mean, that's some blue ass music. I mean, those bending notes. I mean, and actually, we could almost go back to the lecture we heard before with the Hawaiian music. I mean, those bending notes, that's blues. A lot of that is blues. I mean, there's a huge connection there. There's this common thread.
Well, if I could make a comment on all of that, let's say to tie both of those lectures together. You hear this over and over, that musicians, and it tends to be, I think, an unconscious thing, but musicians basically like music, not genres, not bands. They like music, and they're not proud. They'll steal from anybody.
Yeah.
And in the stealing, and I mean this in the positive sense, in the adopting and adapting, they often turn it into something else, which then somebody else listens to and turns into something else. And you hear this over and over again, that and sometimes if you hear the starting point, and the ending point, it's really hard to figure out what the middle was. My favorite example, of course, is the Beatles thought they were being Little Richard. And turned it into something really, different. And again, you hear this kind of thing over and over.
Well, if you talk about the Beatles, I mean, and we can even go from there and go backwards and say the Beatles basically were a skiffle band early on, and skiffle is like basically was like an Irish version of blues.
Yeah.
So it's all connected. It's
All boils down to what you said. It's about the quotation from Duke Ellington. There is two types of music. There's the good music and there's the bad music, and the musicians tend to listen to the good music and incorporate it into their sound, no matter what it is.
And then the other phrase
We aren't proud, we'll steal from anybody.
And the other phrase is, good musicians borrow, great ones steal.
Exactly.
With that,
Thanks, Wayne.